Welcome to the Stronger for Business podcast with Dyfrig Jenkins, Pete Rushmer, and myself, Bev Thorogood. Stronger for Business is a training consortium dedicated to bringing high-quality training solutions to businesses through the combined expertise of our partners. From skills training to developing personal and professional excellence, our mission is to help business owners get the very best from their people at all levels, from boardroom to shop floor. The Stronger for Business podcast is our opportunity to share our knowledge, thoughts and ideas with you, the listener. You'll get to meet some awesome guests from across the business world, sharing their experience of learning and development. If you love what we have to say, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to consume your podcasts so you don't miss out on future episodes. We'd love to hear from you with your suggestions for discussion topics or ideas for future guests. And if you really love what you hear, please do consider leaving us a 5-star review, as this helps to get the podcast out to a wider audience. Sit back and enjoy the Stronger for Business podcast. Hello everybody and welcome to episode 4 of the Stronger for Business podcast, which actually means we're 3 weeks old, doesn't it? Not 4 weeks old. I always get confused with my numbers. So here we are again on a beautiful sunny morning, and we've got Pete there sat in his back garden already, and Dove. Say hi guys.
Hey, morning everyone.
So what we've been up to?
Well, do you want to go first, Diff?
Yeah, I can go first. So this week, although a lot of delivery from all our perspectives and lots of people doing the things that we do is kind of quiet in some respects. There's still been quite a lot of time at the laptop all week this week. So there's still been lots of networking events to join in. And actually, sometimes I prefer doing them virtually, to be honest. I think they're just more succinct often. So that's great. So some have been early in the morning, some have been in the daytimes. And one of the things we did this week was the second webinar with L&D leaders from across the UK as well. So that was quite good. That was very good, actually. We were just talking about learning and development, organizational development, and the HR's role within that. So people within those disciplines. And we were talking about what's going on now. What do we as professionals need to start thinking about during this time in readiness for whenever people start to return to work, and then what happens then. So it's really quite interesting. It's not just the obvious stuff about how to retrain people, how to induct people, and the kind of the practical things, but actually the behavioral things and some of the things we're going to talk about today, actually, about how people feel when they go back to work and how do we reintegrate people back into the workplace. Because for some people, well, it's going to be 2 months at least. For some people, it'll be longer than that, and it will still be disruptive as well. So looking at it more holistically from an organizational development perspective. So that was probably one of the highlights of the week, actually. Yeah, it's really.
And are you doing any more of those? I am so sorry. I didn't have it in my diary for some reason, and I missed it, and I was kicking myself because I missed the first one as well. Have you got future dates coming up?
Yeah, we probably will do, actually. So from the first session, which we did last week, the feedback from some of those people said we definitely want to have another one just to follow up, because obviously things are changing all the time. So we are on the 8th of May recording this. So by the time this goes live, we'll know what the PM will have said in the announcement. So some things may have changed in the next 5 or 7 days. So people are saying, yeah, come on, let's catch up every month or so, just see where we are. So people who have already joined on those webinars can join, and then new people can come in and join on that as well. Because some people, there are lots of things going on, and not everybody can make every single date. So,
but you haven't got a specific date, right? At the minute.
No, that's going to be a job for Monday to diarise something.
Well, what we'll do, we'll make sure that when you've got the date, because obviously, well, it might not be obvious, but we record these podcasts a week in advance. So often when we're talking about what we've been doing this week, it's actually 2 weeks out by the time the podcast goes out. But you can follow us on LinkedIn on the Stronger for Business or the S4B LinkedIn page. So we'll make sure that the dates for your upcoming webinars go onto the LinkedIn page. So
yeah, absolutely.
Guys, if you don't follow us on LinkedIn, please do come and find us. I'll put a link to the page in the show notes so you don't have to go and spend too much time trying to find us, it'll be there. But yeah, fab, brilliant, Dov. We'll get that put into the LinkedIn page.
Cool. Pete, what have you been up to?
Yeah, fantastic. I've had a really, really good week. I feel like I need to, anyone watching this on YouTube, I'm just going to quickly show you what my virtual background looks like, because I look very left out with my back garden, but that is sadly what my what my background looks like. So it doesn't really work, unfortunately. So yeah, those that are listening,
LSD or something.
Yeah. So those that are listening on the podcast, do check out the YouTube too, and you can see my fuzzy, crackly head. But yeah, that's why I've got the garden background. I'm quite excited though. This week I've been doing a lot of work with Bev actually. We've been preparing the intro and outro for my own podcast, A Half Dozen Things, which is going to be launching in the next couple of weeks. And I'm really, really excited. I picked music for it. I recorded the intro, and as listeners will know, Bev is very good at creating a very professional, well-produced podcast, because they've listened to this and I just then, and no doubt the podcast listeners won't even hear that because she's so good at the editing process, and she's been teaching me how to do that as well as how to create the intro, and I'm really, really super excited, super excited. And yeah, I've got a big thanks to Bev really for all her hard work and help, and a bit of a plug for her new podcast training course as well, because I think that's going to be a really valuable training session for those that are interested in sharing their knowledge and building an audience.
I'm going to come to that. A Half Dozen Things podcast. When is it coming out? Give us an idea what it's about. And okay. I'm going to hold your feet to the coals now. Give us a date for when you're going to launch.
Yeah, I've been a bit fuzzy on the date, and well done for giving me some accountability on this. So the reason I've been a bit fuzzy is about the date is that I would like to have some pre-recordings done, so I'm not always chasing my tail trying to get recordings, especially with the situation we're in, trying to ramp back up going into business as well. So it'd be good to have some recordings in the bank. However, as you're putting me under pressure, I will make sure that I have a session published for next Friday.
Wow.
When we record. How about that?
Oh, well.
So
that is brilliant.
Yeah, A Half Dozen Things podcast. You have to do it. Yeah, absolutely. A Half Dozen Things podcast is targeted at business owners and professionals, and particularly people who want to sort of develop their knowledge, develop themselves personally, and I focus on speaking to really interesting guests about their experience and their half dozen things that they find are really important to success, and what they do and the focus areas that they focus on. And it'll help listeners expand their minds around the different areas, different things that they can consider that are important, and how they can develop themselves, and also learn from others' experiences too. Certainly I want to invite you two on to share your half dozen things very soon as well.
I get that. I thought you said really, interesting guests, Pete.
Well, you're both very interesting with a varied background too. But yeah, it gives us an opportunity. We get to talk about business, which is great. We also get to talk about family, the things that are important in life, and also with the focus of having real frank and raw conversations around mental health as well, and how we cope with mental health too. So there's a real focus there too for us.
I think it sounds fantastic, and I know your your first guest is an absolute gem, literally Gem Hills, isn't it? So he's going to be talking XSAS. He's going to be talking about resilience and all sorts of stuff. So I know it's going to be absolutely spot on. And actually, A Half Dozen Things is a brilliant title, and it fits quite nicely with what we're going to be talking about today, which is anxiety. Because I think often when we get anxious, we don't focus on the half dozen things that are probably the most important. Our brain just sort of tries to take in everything, and it gets overwhelmed and can't cope. So we're going to talk a lot about anxiety, which is the focus for today. My week, well, it's been very podcast heavy, as you've very kindly said, Pete. I launched my So You Want to Be a Podcaster training course, which I'm really excited about, and I've had quite a lot of interest already. It's only a week old. It's basically get you from petrified to published in 14 days or less. So you get to work with me one-to-one via Zoom, and we go through absolutely everything you need to know from the very start. Why are you even wanting a podcast? Where does it fit into your marketing plan? What's the purpose of it? Who are your listeners? Right through to pressing the publish button and getting it out there on iTunes, Spotify, and all those major platforms. Because I think a lot of people are put off by the tech, and they maybe don't know where to start. It feels a little bit overwhelming. And actually, it's pretty simple once you know how. So that's what my course is about. So thanks for the plug there, Pete. And it was fab working with you as well, actually. It was absolutely brilliant working with you.
Thank you.
So come on, guys, anxiety. Hands up if you felt anxious lately. Oh, my hand's gone all funny with background.
That are listening, we've all got our hands up.
I look like an alien.
That wasn't good radio. Great TV, but not radio.
Yeah.
Not good radio. Yeah.
Well done, Bev, for the webbed hands, though. For anyone,
web hands.
Watching, you can see Bev's webbed hands. Where are you from, Bev?
Well, I am Newcastle, and some would say that is like an alien planet. So, sorry, all my Geordie friends and colleagues. Yeah, I don't know about you guys. I've really felt anxiety kick in over the last 6 weeks, probably more so than I have for a while. Interestingly, I never used to be anxious, and then I hit my mid-40s and anxiety started to kick in, and I later found out, because it's obviously my speciality, that it's very much menopause related. Now, I don't want to go down the menopause route today, but there are certain chemical changes that can increase anxiety. But situationally, we're in the midst of a situation that is so unusual that our anxiety levels, I think, have rocketed. I read a statistic the other day that said the Office for National Statistics survey had said 49.6% of over 16-year-olds, and that's 25 million people, rated their anxiety as high at the start of lockdown, and that's the highest it's been since the ONS started their records. That's huge, isn't it? That's nearly 50% of the population feeling anxious. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's very prevalent at the moment, and I know certainly from a personal point of view that I've been suffering with high levels of anxiety over the last couple of weeks. Interestingly, one of the other things I do alongside this, HR Connect over coffee, which you guys have been to, as from a networking event point of view, it's a free networking event in Peterborough for HR and L&D people. I've run a survey for HR and L&D professionals this week, and I've already had over 30 respondents, and over 90% of them say that this is going to have a massive impact for them on mental health in their workplace moving forward. So it's a really important conversation that we're having today. And absolutely, there's so much going on at the moment to increase anxiety. There's a lot of fear physically for our well-being, ultimately, even for our health, which is always a clear area for us to feel anxious about if there's a threat to our health. And to our family, but also there's the added impact of us economically as well, and that's going to increase anxiety too. So it's sort of a double whammy, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my perspective, I think talking to lots of people and I think actually some days I speak to more people on Zoom than I would in a normal day before COVID, and I think the anxiety is the not knowing. So I think it's the ambiguity, or you can use whatever word we want to use, but it's the not knowing what's going to happen next. Politically, when we come out of lockdown, what's going to happen with finances, what's going to happen with our health generally, what happens with our health when we go back to work, will it be a second peak? There's just so many things going around, and depending on how much media we listen to or watch, we are being potentially force-fed some factual information, but a lot of false information or not quite accurate information. So there's the ambiguity or the uncertainty, I think, is causing a lot of anxiety as well. I think for me this week is there's the official news, if you like, from government through the main media channels. I tend not to read newspapers and things. I try and go for the more factual news channels. But sometimes even on the BBC, you can read, well, the Department of Education thinks that some schools might go back in June. Well, we don't know if they will or they won't, but then that causes me a bit of anxiety, because what if the kids do go back to work and then we can't go back to work, which doesn't really affect me and my wife so much because we're a bit more flexible in our work. But for some parents, well, they can't go back to work until the kids go back to school. and vice versa. But what happens if there's a phased approach for the kids going back to school? What happens if some years go back to school and some don't, which the schools are also saying might happen. But you can't have one child going to school and the other one not going to school. And if you've got two kids like I've got, and they both go to two different schools, and they're in different years, then, think, what's going to happen? Kind of logistically. So it's not just the macro stuff; it's the day-to-day planning that families tend to have as well. So I think there's a lot of conscious anxiety, but there's a lot of unconscious anxiety, which every now and again bubbles to the surface and then bubbles back down again. So I think it depends on the day sometimes.
I was reading something yesterday about furloughed staff. It was on an HR forum, and they were saying, how much notice do you need to give your furloughed staff that they need to come back to work? And they were talking about 24 hours being reasonable. And it got me thinking that actually 24 hours may be reasonable, but if you've got childcare issues, 24 hours isn't a very long time to try and sort something out. So that's going to force anxiety levels to go up as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just out of curiosity, guys, how do you feel anxiety? And what physically, let me try and say that properly. What physically do you feel that lets you know that you're feeling anxious?
So I always feel it's almost like butterflies in my belly. But the best way of explaining it is that feeling you got when you were a child and you're about to do the nativity play. And I got it as early as that, and you can sort of feel that in your stomach. And one of the things you just mentioned, and I feel it now when I think about it, and I'm already starting to feel anxious about when things go back to normal, because what's happened is we've found a new normal, which is at home. And that's going to get disrupted again to then go back to normality. And the challenge around that is that it's when you lose momentum, it's like a spinning wheel. If a spinning wheel loses momentum, you have to push that much harder to get the momentum back up. So when we're in normal life, the wheel's spinning, and the momentum's there. But I feel anxious about all that extra effort and the complexities, like you say, on a local level of childcare and dealing with things and what have you, of all the challenges we're going to face there. And it physically I can feel it. Whereas I can feel my heart rate increase. I can feel, sometimes even that I sweat, that I stutter, that my mouth goes dry. That's a really, really big one. When I'm speaking to people and I start to feel anxious, whether it's to a group of people or not, my mouth going dry, that's a real physical element too.
For me, it is quite interesting actually. Just reading up in preparation for this podcast. For those of you that are just listening,
apologies to the YouTube watchers. My wife thinks she's funny giving me that mug when I'm going on a call. Apologies.
We'll move on. It's just identifying some of the signs, because sometimes you're conscious about them, and sorry, I'm still laughing at Pit's mug, and sometimes you're not really aware of them. But when I'm feeling anxious, I tend to get the classic signs. It's the fight or flight responses. So you get the sweaty palms and the dry mouth, like Peter was talking about, and a few other things. But what I feel, if I'm feeling particularly anxious, I feel the tightening in my chest, not like a heart attack or angina, but general pressure on my chest. And I get short-tempered as well, interestingly. So I know if I'm getting short-tempered with myself or another bloody marketing email, as an example, or if the kids, and it's like, oh, my God, they're great. But if they just think, as a parent, sometimes you feel like you're repeating yourself several times a day about doing the same things or daily tasks. Sometimes I get more and more short-tempered. But I think the family, like most families, will know when the pressure's there, from whatever reason, and that can create anxiety. Then that kind of manifests itself in those two ways, really. I tend to get that pressure and that kind of, not a feeling of being overwhelmed so much, but a feeling of needing to get out. So if I'm starting to feel anxious or stressed, or the other associated signs and symptoms, usually a walk with a dog to the field kind of sorts that out. We can talk about that later. But it's just like it's the feeling of pressure. Really.
I mean, I think there's a few things that we've talked about there that aren't necessarily anxiety, and I think sometimes we clump feelings of discomfort together and call it anxiety. And it may well be that we're anxious, but I think for me, if I go on stage and talk, or if I'm delivering a presentation of some sort, I do get the butterflies in my stomach, and I get the sweaty palms, and I get all the negative self-chatter about, what if you mess your lines up, or what if you forget what you're talking about. But to me, that's nerves. That's situational nerves.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a level of anxiety there, but it's perfectly normal. And I think, when you're getting a bit cross with the kids because they're not doing what they're told, and it makes you feel that sort of tightness, that's perfectly normal. It's situational. I think for me, where I struggle with anxiety is when I'm basically, there's cognitive distortions going on, thought distortions going on. I'm catastrophizing, I'm overgeneralizing, I'm sort of all or nothing thinking. All of those cognitive distortions are going on, and it's not necessarily situational. It's almost like it's an overreaction to the situation. So, and I think there's a difference between situational anxiety and almost sort of forward-paced anxiety. I'm anxious and worried about things that aren't even happening now. They're not even happening yet, and I'm worrying about them unnecessarily, irrationally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's sort of a few types of anxiety, which is absolutely true. The type you're talking about now, like generalized anxiety disorder. So that's around when you feel anxious on days over a period of time about things that are going to occur into the future. I think Biff and I were sort of referring to like social anxiety, so to speak, which is that feeling of speaking publicly. Some people get worried about eating in public, for example, or anything that might embarrass or make them feel a bit humiliated. And then there's other anxieties that we haven't sort of touched on, things like panic attacks, phobias. My wife's got a massive phobia of spiders, and that's sort of an anxiety disorder too. Yeah, sorry, I know. I'm sorry, I'm bad. But it is one of those things. Panic. I've physically witnessed people having panic attacks, and they genuinely think they're having a heart attack. Genuine panic attacks. OCD is a form of anxiety too, obsessive compulsive disorder, and PTSD too as well. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a form of anxiety.
Can we talk about PTSD? I know we talked about this before we came on air, and you mentioned that you have struggled with PTSD, and you were happy to share that, Pete. Would you?
Yeah, of course.
Would you be happy to tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it's really important.
Yeah, of course. I was having a really interesting conversation with a friend, and if he's listening, he'll know who it is too. But PTSD, a lot of people associate with being someone who's been on the front line, witnessed tragedy at a real deep level, and what have you. But it isn't just that. Anything that's traumatic for people, whether they have an accident or it might be an assault. Someone might have been assaulted. They could have been mugged and hurt quite badly. Something like that is quite likely to cause post-traumatic stress, and it's something which causes you to have a difficulty in relaxing. Is one. So you're anxious a lot of the time. You can have upsetting dreams and flashbacks as well. And then you sort of have this avoidance of anything that's related to the event. You kind of just bury it, and you don't want to talk about it. So when I was just before I was 18, I had what's called a lung hemorrhage. So my lungs filled with blood, and I was poorly for a few weeks leading up to an admission to hospital, and I couldn't breathe, and it got worse and worse and worse, and I got more poorly, and I was admitted to hospital pretty much unconscious by ambulance, and I'd been given oxygen, and actually the symptoms are quite similar to the ones we're hearing about with coronavirus. And I couldn't really breathe, and I remember they sent me for some scans, and I'd been given oxygen, so I started to get more. See, even now talking about it, my mind doesn't really want to deal with it. But I started to get more aware of what was going on with the oxygen I'd been given. The doctor puts an X-ray up and asks if he's okay to bring in some student doctors. I lived in Cambridge at the time, and it was Addenbrooke's Hospital, so it's a big university, Cambridge University teaching hospital. And he brought in, there's probably about 15 to 20 students entered this little waiting room where I was on oxygen, and he said, "You guys won't see this again." it's really important that you take note. And it was an X-ray of my chest, and you could actually see the white. You could see my lungs were filled with blood, and they were going to sedate me. And I remember I was sort of, like I say, 17. My mum was with me, and she said, "I'll be here when you wake up." And I woke up 8 weeks later. It was mad. It was absolutely mad. And I'd been in intensive care for that amount of time on a ventilator, as a lot of people have been. I lost 25 kilos in weight during that time. And yeah, it was a horrific thing to deal with. And as I look back, the NHS were fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I got all the care in the world. They ended up making me better. They had a last-ditch attempt to make me better, which was like a clotting agent drug, which ended up clotting my blood. And I ended up having to go back and revisit after I'd got better. And I'd ended up having pulmonary embolisms, which were clots in my blood. And I had to get treated with warfarin, and for several years in my 20s I was on warfarin, having my blood thinned to reduce the clots. And what I realise now, the NHS were absolutely fantastic, and this isn't me knocking them, but they were fantastic physically at getting me better. But I was quite poorly for a number of years, like from a mental point of view. I struggled to cope with that as a young man. And as I look back now, you know, I know what that is. I had a sense of PTSD, and I had a survivor syndrome, which is where you feel guilty. You feel guilty for surviving and that you shouldn't have done. So yeah, it's something that I've dealt with. It's shaped a lot of some of the decisions I've made in the past. It's a difficult thing to cope with. But you know, like I said, the flashback element and the anxiety. So a good example of that is that after I got better, I didn't really believe I was better physically. So for the first several years, I was almost like a hypochondriac. The smallest amount of a cough or flu symptoms or anything like that, I was straight back into hospital. You know, so, but it affects people in different levels. I put a video on LinkedIn the other day about mental health, and the great thing about doing that, when you open yourself up to people as willing to talk about stuff, all of a sudden people talk to you, and you have some amazing conversations. And a long-standing friend of mine who I would probably know was a bit anxious sometimes, but he rang me the other day, and he said, I've been diagnosed with PTSD. And I was like, right, okay. And we sort of had a bit of a chat about it. And for him, it was around, he's been running a business for like 10 years, and he was going through really bad times with the business financially, and there was some debt involved and what have you. And he got to the point where he was checking his bank 30 times a day, because what had happened previously is a lump of money had disappeared out of the bank that he wasn't anticipating. And it, along with other stuff and family stuff around, you know, various challenges that he'd faced with miscarriages and things like that, and all the things that happen as a part of life, they'd all sort of just bundled up on top of each other, and he'd been in a really, really tough place, and he'd been to the doctor. And when you sit with a GP, and get diagnosed for a mental health condition, they will go through they will go through the symptoms, and it's essentially a tick box exercise as to what category you fit best in, because you're labellising essentially. You know, mental health issues are quite complex, and the doctor said, well, you're depressed. And he was like, well, but I'm not depressed. That's not my problem. And he sort of went through again. And anyway, the second visit to the doctor said, read out all the conditions and symptoms of PTSD. And it was like that nailed it. And I said, well, you know, have you been given any medication, and what's happening? And he said, to be honest, he goes, now that I've read and know about it, it's making a massive difference just acknowledging that problem's there and what it is. And for me, it was much the same, actually. It was just acknowledging that, okay, I have this challenge, and these are some of the things, and it's normal. You know, it's normal to feel this way, and it's normal. And I see a reaction. It might be a physical reaction or an emotional reaction to something, and it triggers, and I go, I know you, I see what you are, and I see what's coming, and being able to then sort of manage it in that way. And he said to me, he goes, I don't want to talk to anyone about it, 'cause people's automatic reaction is sympathy. He goes, I don't want people's sympathy. I just want to feel normal again. Mm-hmm. And that's such a, and I don't know, I only experienced it as a man, and I don't know if women are the same way, but as two men talking about it, that was something that really resonated with both of us, this thing that being able to talk about it, but also the automatic reaction not being sympathy and, oh, that must be so bad. It's the, I just want it to be normal. I just want to be able to deal with it in my own way and just carry on and be live as normal as possible. Yeah, exactly. So there you go. Sorry, I've gone on for a while.
No, but it's so interesting. No, it is interesting, and I think if I can share a couple of stories very, very quickly. So my brother was in the Air Force at the time of Lockerbie, and he was based in Carlisle, at Spade Adam in Carlisle, and he and some of his colleagues, he was a corporal at the time. So he had a team of senior aircraftmen underneath him, all very young. Bear in mind, he was only 24, I think, at the time. He might have been younger, but I think he was 24. And he had younger guys going out. And basically, they were there at the scene, picking up debris from Lockerbie. And I remember him saying he was absolutely fine. The debris was so destroyed, most of it was hard to recognise it for what it was. But during that sort of clear up, he found a human ear, and that was really distressing. And actually, the Air Force now have a brilliant mental health policy. They're very supportive. They have policies in place and people in place to help. But we're going back to the 80s, and they really didn't give these guys any follow-up support. There was very little counselling or chat about what they'd gone through. And my brother's now in his, mid to late 50s, and he still has occasional flashbacks to that time. And he's had mental health struggles throughout his whole life. And it's only actually quite recently that he's made the connection that potentially what he's suffered all these years is a form of PTSD following the trauma of that Lockerbie. And I mean, that's quite extreme. Yours is quite extreme, Pete. But I can relate a little bit, and I wouldn't call it PTSD. I would just call it a form of anxiety. But about 10 or 12 years ago, I lost my car on black ice. I literally lost control of it, spun, ended up backwards in a hedge. Not a scratch, not a bruise. I wasn't hurt at all. But that loss of control was terrifying. And it was on a particular piece of road that was on my commute to work. And for a good year and a half after that, I couldn't drive that bit of road. I had to take a detour along a different bit of road. And the only way I really got around it was to gradually force myself to drive down that bit of road. And for a long time, I would only do it in beautifully dry weather. I wouldn't do it in any kind of wintry conditions. And now I've got over it. I can drive that road and not even have a thought about it. But for a long time, that even just that spinning the car off the road without any injury, without any pain, was enough to make me avoid that situation, which I think is really interesting. There must be, people must be dealing with incidents that they feel. I mean, I felt embarrassed to say, I didn't actually hurt myself, but I can't drive that road.
I'm so glad you mentioned. I mentioned the embarrassment element of it as well, because one thing I'll say to anyone is there's absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about at all. I spent 10 years probably feeling embarrassed for how I felt about what had happened to me, because I thought, I've not served in the army, I've not seen death on a large scale. I witnessed some. I had that situation where people were taken out with white blankets on the bed, and I did witness that, and now I realise that is traumatic. But I was embarrassed about how I felt, and my friend that I was speaking to, he feels totally mortified about it and embarrassed too. And that's it, it's not embarrassing. The fact that you've had a scary incident occur, and it's totally natural to then avoid that stretch of road again. Totally natural. That is absolutely a human instinct, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's the body protecting us, isn't it? The body, exactly. the mind, the unconscious mind, the conscious mind, I guess, want to protect us, so that it's not going to want us to relive the pain or the discomfort that we've gone through. So it'll do anything at all to protect us. And that release of adrenaline, that hormone release that creates the knot in the stomach and the sweaty hands and the racing heart, it's our fight or flight response, and it's there to protect us. And I think there's it sounds a bit flippant, but I do think there's a point at which you almost, rather than fighting the fear of revisiting those emotions, is acknowledging that they're real, acknowledging that they're allowed, acknowledging that they're normal, and actually almost showing appreciation for them, mentally saying, do you know what, I can see what you're doing here, and I really, brain, I'm thankful that you're looking after me, but I'm okay, I can deal with this. And actually acknowledging and thanking your body for protecting you, but not giving into it.
And that's absolutely why, the conversation I was having with my friend, awareness training and awareness education of people will only serve to help them be able to cope with those situations, because we all face our own challenges, and and those challenges we face will all affect us on a different level depending on our capacity to cope and the other things that are going on in our lives. But the better awareness we have of something, the better level of training that we've given ourselves, or reading or what have you, it gives us that ability to be able to acknowledge and cope much better. And I'm not saying that that's the only solution. There's lots and lots of solutions for dealing with various anxiety, depression disorders. However, one of them is awareness, and being able to just acknowledge how you feel, and then knowing when the right time is to be able to seek further help if it's needed, which again is totally valid as well. But yeah, validating, certainly it's the first step. The first step is to be able to just recognize something and validate it, and not write it off.
I'm going to generalize really broadly now. I think ladies can be, not always are, but can be better at sharing these things than guys have. And I think with the whole mental health agenda and the wellness and well-being, particularly the focus on men's health, physical and mental, over the last 5, I guess, or so years, I think it's given men the green light, if you like, to say, do you know what, guys, it's actually all right to talk about this. And some guys will naturally do that. Some guys have got friends that they can, like my Pete was just saying, it might not be comfortable, it might not be easy, but you'll have that conversation. But there's other guys that, again, I don't talk about my feelings. I'm a man. Don't do that. Don't do this kind of thing. So I think there's been a bit of a shift, which has been helpful, and it is okay to feel the way that you are. But it is important to have those conversations, because, like, I don't have experiences like Brian has. As brother, I don't have experiences like Pete. I've been in a couple of bumps and scrapes with cars, but not to a degree that I couldn't drive down that road. So I can understand that anxiety, although I've not experienced that. And it's really interesting you're saying about the pessimism, because our brains are not optimistic; they are pessimistic to keep us alive. All the stuff that you said, because if we're optimistic, then we probably would have died millennia ago. Because I think, well, it's okay to go out and not be thinking about danger and stuff like that. So whilst it's there to keep us healthy and alive, our brains, it is it's unhelpful in many ways as well. So I think, like you said, Bev, actually recognizing the fact that your brain is doing what it's been programmed to do, and acknowledging that, and maybe thanking that, but then moving on from that. I think my highest level of anxiety was a number of years ago, and it's quite different to yours, but I think I'll just throw it into the mix just for the variety. So when Elaine and I got engaged, that wasn't an anxious time, by the way. Let me just make that really clear to start with. So we decided we were going to get engaged, and probably about 6 months in, something like that. We both worked for Thomas Cook at the time, and Elaine was based in the London office, and I was based in the Bromley office. And this was post 9/11, so we're probably talking 2000, 2001, something like that. And all 600 people from these two offices were brought together in the Bromley Theatre to all be told they were all being made redundant. So this is great. So we're going to get married in 6 months' time, and both of us being made redundant. I'm like, okay, so that's interesting. But then the company said, we can relocate you to Peterborough if you want to. So it was like, it wasn't a forced relocation, but the offer was there. But it meant Elaine moving out of the flat that she shared with her friend, me selling my house, and and then thinking about redundancy, thinking about getting married, because obviously there's a lot of financial outlay and planning, which had already happened for the wedding. And then we thought, well, actually, we both still enjoy working for the company, so then we relocate. So that we were getting engaged, getting married, having to sell houses and move out, then relocating, and then trying to find another house, essentially then starting a new job on top of that as well, in a new site with new people. And all those things, it's the same company, but it's like starting a new job. And then relocating to Peterborough, because we didn't know the area at all. So we had to come up and do familiarization visits, find a house, move into the house, all that kind of stuff, and then get married at the end of it as well. So that was a highly pressured 6 months. And I think, most of the things that, provide stress and anxiety and all those kind of things, yes, they are situational. I think we had a lot of them within the 6 month period. But what helped, come back to what Bev was saying earlier, is the fact that we recognize why. And in that case, it's very obvious because it's in your face literally every day. But recognizing why the anxiety is there. And I think once you start to recognize that and call that out for what it is, then that's really helpful. And we're like, we just have to get on with it. And I think we both like that. We're quite resilient as people. And I'm not saying people who are less resilient, I don't think any different of those of other people. So I think we just kind of got on with it. It is what it is. We don't have a choice. We just have to get on with it. So we called it out and just got on with it. But,
and that's perfectly normal, isn't it? And I think that's really interesting, because what we're saying here is that, life throws fastballs at us. Life throws stuff at us, and it can make us worried. It can make us feel anxious in the moment. And that's perfectly normal. I think what would be worrying is if now every time you had something happen that was out of the ordinary, your reaction was over the top, based on a fear of what has happened in the past. And I think that's where the real problems arise with out of proportion anxiety. I don't think that's a technical term, but anxiety that is over the top in relation to the situation. And I think for a lot of people at the moment, they're going through those cognitive distortions. They're going through a time that is uncomfortable, but they're almost exaggerating. And that this sounds belittling. It's not meant to at all. It's the mind's way of protecting, but they're exaggerating the problem, and the news really doesn't help, because the news reinforces those exaggerations, which is why your strategy of not watching too much of it, Dov, is probably a great strategy. And the whole issue with my driving experience, of course I'd have been anxious while I'm out of control and spinning, and I could hear the hedge sort of rattling as the back end of the car ploughed through it. That was an expected and realistic level of anxiety for the situation I was going through. But a year later, driving past that road, the level of anxiety that I felt was out of proportion to the situation, because the chances of that happening again were very slim. And I think that's where we need to be very cognizant of the level of anxiety that we're going through at any point in time, and almost try to rationalize, is this a realistic level of anxiety I feel, bearing in mind the situation?
Maybe I didn't articulate properly, I don't think I did, so I had that situational anxiety, but it doesn't manifest itself now. I think that was just in that point of time, whereas what you guys are talking about, and I think it's helpful for other people to realize, is that I've had anxiety like lots of people have, but it doesn't manifest itself later. It doesn't pop up in my mind again. Well, I kind of boxed that away. Now that was part of life. It doesn't pop up. So I think, what you're both talking about, and the point of this is, anxiety comes in different ways, and it revisits people in different ways, or in the same way over a period of time. And I think that's the distinction I was trying to make. But I don't
and you did.
Clearly.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to raise was about the frequency illusion. So, and something that I talk to sort of HR managers about quite regularly, and leaders in business, and that is that if we learn about mental health and we talk about anxiety in the way that we do, and the people that will tune in and take the time to listen to what we're talking about today, will have a much higher level of understanding and grasp of those feelings and be able to recognize those. When you're leading people, the challenge we have is this frequency illusion where we anticipate that those people understand the things that we understand to the same level. And the challenge is actually that the vast majority of people around us really haven't started to accept or learn about the different mental health challenges that we face and how to actually deal with them. I think that's a big challenge in businesses at the moment.
And there's no one size fits all, is there? We're all different. We all experience anxiety for different reasons and in different ways.
Yeah,
we've all got a different story, haven't we? We've all got stories that shape.
Absolutely, yeah. And our experiences shape the way we think about the present situation. We'll base it on our own map of the world. There is a useful tool if you are struggling with irrational anxiety, maybe, or anxiety in general, called the SUDS rating, which is subjective units of distress scale. And it's basically, well, I've seen it as a 0 to 100 or a 1 to 10 scale. I prefer 1 to 10. And basically the way it works is it's about self-analyzing your level of distress and being able to recognize whether your level is realistic for the situation. And if it's not, accepting that your body's trying to protect you and being able to manage your anxiety levels down. So just very, very quickly then. So if you're feeling anxious, and you can give it doesn't really matter how accurate it is. It's more about this, because it is subjective. It's about understanding or giving a number to the feeling at the time. So 10 is effectively, it's unbearably upset. You can't function. You're close to breakdown. It's like the worst you could possibly be. 9 is sort of extremely anxious. You're desperate. You feel helpless. You're not coping. 8 is you're worried and panicky. You've got physical symptoms. Maybe that knot in the stomach is starting. Feeling physically sick. Maybe headaches. And then a 7 is high level of discomfort. Your discomfort is predominating in your thoughts. All you can think about is what you're worrying about. 6 is milder discomfort, so irregular feelings of discomfort, but they come and go. They're not predominating constantly. 5, upset and uncomfortable, but you're functioning. 4, moderate anxiety and worry. It's sort of normal for the level of uncertainty that you're living in. So, for example, with everything that's going on at the minute, you might be worrying about older parents, you might be worrying about the health of your kids, you might be worrying about schooling. That's a normal level of worry for what's going on. So a 4 would be normal. If you were at a 10, it would be disproportionate to what's going on. 3 is sort of a little bit worried, but functioning fine. 2, maybe a bit sad. And 1 is that there's just no distress. You're focused and you're comfortable. And it's just a way to kind of put a number to the feeling. So for example, if my level of anxiety driving past that road was a sort of 7 or an 8, I'm worried and panicky and I can feel all the physical symptoms, and I can recognize and put, hang on a minute, I feel at an 8, but the reality of this situation is I should be at a 2. I should be maybe feeling a bit sad about what's happened in the past because I lost my car from it, but realistically I shouldn't be at an 8 now. And you can kind of the idea is that you can then start to talk yourself down. And it's a very simple process, but of course, like anything simple, it's not necessarily easy to do. But it's certainly something that therapists use to help gauge where somebody's level of anxiety is.
Mm-hmm. What's that scale called again, Bev?
It's the SUDS rating, or subjective units of distress scale. Nothing to do with bubbles.
Yeah, what a great tool that is. Well, one of the things I wanted to suggest as part of our discussion as well is to seek help through CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, which I know is very, very effective. I've got my own personal views on medication and medicating mental health conditions, which I think are good they're good in certain situations, but certainly behavioural therapy is fantastic. SUDS is a great example, and CBT is freely about if people and they're facing and challenge at home. Sort of being able to recognize how they feel and do small things that they have control over,
Pete,
and going out and getting fresh air. And
Pete, let me just stop you there, because I don't know if it did for you, Div, but your sound distorted completely. So what I'll do, I'll cut that bit out because it won't work. So if you can go back, I think where it broke was you said SUDs is a great tool, and then you start talking about CBT. So if you can start going back to CBT, and I'll cut this out.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so SUDS is a great tool. Another one that I wanted to suggest that's very good, and SUDS will be a part of that, is CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy, and it's something that's freely available through the NHS. As far as I know, certainly locally it is, and CBT is a great way to be able to categorise and understand the challenges that we face, and be able to create tools to help ourselves cope in a similar way to how SUDS does as well. So it's definitely worth reading up on it and seeking help if people need to. There's simple things we can do at home, like sort of acknowledging the challenge that we face and being kind to ourselves. Doing small things like making our bed, things that we have control over, because often it's this feeling of lack of control and fear. And then getting outside, eating healthily, etc. That they're all ways to help too. I have my personal concerns over medication, and sometimes it might be the right solution. But certainly things like CBT and SUDS, they're great proactive ways that we can support ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's this feeling of being out of control that creates the greater anxiety. If we can sort of work out which bits we have no control over and let them go, if we can, much easier said than done, and concentrate on maybe the half dozen things that we have control over, that can help us to feel back in control. And as you say, sometimes it's as simple as making your bed, because you have control over that. The danger, I think, comes when we become over controlling. Of course, then we end up potentially moving into things like anorexia, bulimia, things like that, where you're using food or alcohol to control because you have control over that. But way different direction for the conversation. I think
on
sorry, Deb.
I think it's worth calling out some of the stuff that's freely available, like Peter was just saying. So on the NHS website, there's a really good page. So if you just go into the NHS website, just type in anxiety, there's some really good tools on there. So there's like a quick self-assessment guide with some suggestions on how to, and it might be based on the same scale that you were just talking about, the SUDS scales, actually. I don't know. But, just based on your answers, it gives you some potential solutions. There's some videos on there as well, and some PDFs, some guides and things as well. So, yeah, if people feel that they're anxious, or, for line managers and business owners and business leaders, it probably is worth reading up on this kind of thing. No, not only for yourself, but for your teams and your people as well, because not everybody, a lot of people will be feeling levels of anxiety and all the associated stuff that goes around that as well. So, for the people who are listening, L&D people, HR people, business owners, leaders, I think it's really important that you just kind of raise your own level of awareness of this, because it's something that we will all be dealing with. And it's important that employers are there and they continue the support during this. It's something else to think about, but during the phased return back to work, it's important that employees and leaders think about these things, because it's potentially become quite critical to the success of your business and the well-being of your teams.
I think there's danger as well that we assume that everybody's feeling anxious about not being at work, working from home and all that sort of thing. Yes. But actually for some people, their anxiety levels will have gone down. They don't have that horrendous commute. They're not squashed up, next to complete strangers on the tube. They're not having to work with that, I was going to be rude there, with that idiot that they have to deal with day in, day out in the workplace. They've been able to relax from all that, and working from home in this new normal as we have at the minute may actually have reduced their anxiety, and therefore I think it's important that HR, line managers, L&D recognise that actually when we go back to the normal, whatever that might look like, ways of working, for some people, that return is going to induce more anxiety than what they're going through right now.
Probably, actually.
Do you know what? We've actually gone well over the hour now. Obviously, this has been for me, a really interesting conversation that we've got absorbed in. So I don't think really we've got time to do our learnings from this week. So I'm very keen to keep these podcasts to between 40 and 60 minutes. So by the time I've done my little bit of editing, we'll probably come down to below the hour. But yeah, anything else any of you guys want to just add on in terms of today's subject before we go?
Just finally, yoga, meditation, breathing exercises, all great simple things that you can do at home, freely available, can all help channel your energy, channel your thoughts.
Brilliant.
Yeah, for me, it's keep eating healthily. All the common sense stuff. Common sense, not necessarily common practice. Eat well, go and get some fresh air within the guidelines, of course. Keep your mind and your body active, and recognize the anxiety. And like we said earlier, if we are feeling anxious, have some reflection time and understand why that is, and then we can do something about it. Because, like most things, the recognition is the important part. Then you can move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And final bit from me is really accept and acknowledge that it's perfectly normal. You're not abnormal. If you're feeling anxious at the minute, it's perfectly fine. Guys, I look forward to chatting to you all next week, and thanks again for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you for joining us on the Stronger for Business podcast. Final thought before we go, in the words of Albert Einstein, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. Have a great week. Join us next Friday for our next episode of the Stronger for Business podcast.